Hello and welcome to this collection of my favourite summer recipes. Summer, isn't it a terrific time for those lighter dishes? Salads, lots of fish and seafood, and fruity desserts. I hope you'll enjoy viewing the recipes, then cooking the dishes, and eating them with passion. Bon appetit! Quiz time once again on Consuming Passions. And the question is, why are today's pizzas the shape and size they are? Of course, it's so they fit into all those flat cardboard boxes. But that wasn't always the case. Traditional pizzas came in all sorts of shapes and sizes. For instance, the pizza rustica often came with a lid. And the calzone is more like a pasty. And it's the calzone that's on the menu today in Consuming Passions. Pizza dough folded over a mixture of ricotta cheese and other splendid ingredients. The process starts with a yeast booster. I take a little sugar, about a teaspoon or so, a little flour, again a teaspoon or so, and some dried yeast. 1 sachet will be enough. I mix these with a little tepid water and allow the mixture to stand for a few minutes. During that time, the yeast will come to life. Now I take some plain white flour, about 500 grams, make a well in the middle, and add a little olive oil, a good virgin olive oil for this, and my yeast mixture, and mix it well. I then add water to make it into a reasonably firm dough. Once it's well mixed, it's covered with a damp tea towel and allowed to stand for at least an hour in a warm place. If you don't have a warm place, leave it for longer. Now to that ricotta filling. I've taken a quantity of ricotta cheese and I've allowed the whey to drain away from it, and now it's ready for use. Into a large bowl. Now this is a beautiful, soft, delicately flavoured cheese with a creamy consistency, but it is, however, low in fat. It's mixed with a little grated Parmesan cheese, higher in fat, but also stronger in flavour, so I don't need to use very much. Now to some anchovy fillets. These are Australian anchovy fillets, and I used 10 or 11 or even a dozen of these. Depends how much you like a fishy flavour. They go in with the cheeses, and some sage leaves, chopped up finely. You could use dried sage. It does dry quite well. But don't use too much. It's quite a powerful herb. Some dried tomatoes. I know that some dried tomatoes are a bit passé these days, but in this dish, they're perfectly all right. A little pepper, some grated nutmeg, and it's all mixed together well. And I return to the dough. It should have risen in size, which it has, and it's just transferred to a well-floured work surface. It's then kneaded. This is one of my favorite cooking jobs. A good kneading. I love to knead. Need to knead. Just make sure that the dough doesn't stick to the board. Adding flour when necessary. And after about 5 minutes, I divide the mixture into 4, then roll out each piece for my calzone into a rough circle, and a thin rolling pin is best for this job, I find anyway. Once rolled, I put a dollop of the ricotta mixture onto one side, wet around the edge, fold over the other side, and make sure that the parcel is well sealed. It then goes onto an oiled baking tray, and once I've made 4, there's only one thing to do before they go into the oven, and that's a light brushing of olive oil in which I've had a garlic clove gently resting for that slight garlic flavour. And it's into the oven. A hot oven, about 220 degrees C, for around 20 minutes, or until the tops are a beautiful golden brown. When the calzone is cooked, there are only two things left to do. To cut it open, unleashing those aromas of tomato, ricotta and sage, and consuming with passion, and possibly a small glass of dry red Australian wine. From Consuming Passions, till next time, bon appetit. Quiz time once again on Consuming Passions. The question is, what am I? I look a bit pasty, I'm not very tasty, though I don't feel too bad. I'm full of fine things, like minerals and proteins. I am good for you, and my name is tofu. Yes, jolly old bean curd. Not much to look at, but a powerhouse of nutritional goodies, magnesium and phosphorus, to name but two. Now, although tofu doesn't have much flavour, what it does do well is it absorbs the flavour of things you cook with it, such as pawpaw, as in today's recipe for pawpaw and tofu soup. Easy to make, easy to eat. This simple. First, I take a ripe pawpaw, or papaya as it's also known, take out the seeds, and cut the flesh away from the skin. This is then chopped up and put into a pan full of salt-reduced stock. Here I use either a chicken or a vegetable stock, about 1 litre to 500 grams of pawpaw flesh, and it's quietly cooked to soften. Depending on how ripe the pawpaw is, this could take as little as 5 minutes. While it's simmering, I cook up some taste sensations. In a little oil, a couple of teaspoons of peanut oil and a teaspoon or so of sesame oil, I gently cook a couple of tablespoons of spring onion, the white part. Now I crush some fresh ginger and chop it up finely. I need about a teaspoon of chopped minced ginger. Some minced garlic, a couple of cloves, and a little chilli. Just 4 or 5 minutes of cooking. Once the pawpaw has softened, I strain the mixture, crushing the pawpaw flesh through the strainer. This could also be put in a blender for this process. The stock and the strained pawpaw is now put in with the garlic, ginger, onion and chilli mixture, and the whole thing is just simmered gently for about a quarter of an hour. While it's simmering, I just add a few more ingredients to give the soup a real Asianness. Some lemongrass root, which I just chop off and crush. I also add a few very fine strips of lime leaf. You could actually use a strip of lemon rind, but lime leaves are really fabulous. The juice of a couple of limes. Here again, you could use lemon juice, a tablespoon or so, and some ground coriander, a teaspoon or so of this wonderful spice. Bliss. And a few minutes before serving, I cut up some pieces of my tofu, the bean curd, and add it to the soup to allow the other flavors to infuse it. And when it's time to serve, I swirl in a little coconut milk, remembering that although it's high in saturated fat, it's okay to use from time to time. I sprinkle on some strips of capsicum for colour and crunch, a few crushed roasted peanuts, the unsalted kind of course, and a generous sprinkling of freshly chopped coriander leaves. And there it is. Hot and sour, sweet and spicy. A taste explosion from Consuming Passions. The perfect partner for this? Fruity white Australian wine, such as a Chenin Blanc, will be absolutely perfect. Till next time, bon appetit. Pasta is such a versatile food, and whether you make it yourself or buy it, it's always a terrific companion to fish, seafood and meat. Try these for sides. It takes very special people to dedicate a good part of their waking lives to working in restaurant kitchens. Apart from having an aptitude for cooking and working extraordinarily long hours, often in hot and cramped conditions, a certain masochistic streak probably helps. One of the rarest combinations found in kitchens is that of mother and son. But it works well here at the Sydney restaurant where Franca Manfredi and her little boy Stefano perform a culinary duet seemingly with consummate ease. I wondered, how did all this begin?
I'd been cooking non-professionally because I have that background through my mother, and my grandmother had a restaurant in Milan, so we had that background. But it was then a matter of talking my mother into coming in and working with us.
Yes, did he have to bully you to get you to do the...
Well, at the beginning I thought it was okay. I was really excited, but I was thinking, Jesus, my age, start a new career is a bit too much.
And how long have you been doing it now?
Nearly 13 years.
Now, what is the style of food that you like to specialise in?
Well, the style of food is our family's home cooking, our traditional home cooking, but put in the context of a restaurant. So we present it with the professionalism of a top restaurant, but it's very simple.
Simple indeed, but done with such flair and, of course, the freshest possible ingredients. For instance, one of the most recognisably Italian foods, pasta. Franca makes her own daily, and she begins with ordinary, everyday, plain white flour, to which she adds eggs and mixes well before putting in water. She makes up a dough and then kneads it well until she's satisfied with the texture, neither too sticky nor too firm. She begins rolling it out roughly before feeding it into the pasta rollers. It's a process Franca repeats until she gets exactly the thickness she likes, or more appropriately, thinness. Well, this is the kind of dexterity I could watch for hours. Only it doesn't take Franca hours, just a few moments of magic. Of course, she does point out that this could also be done with a rolling pin at home, where the numbers to serve won't be of restaurant proportions. The final act with the pasta, for today's Consuming Passions recipe, which is for pasta alla chitarra with scallops, is to pass the flattened lasagna-type sheets through a chitarra, a very ancient form of cutter resembling a musical instrument. Just a wooden frame strung with wire. Pretty much like a guitar, really, hence its name. And there it is, pasta alla Franca.
Nice spaghetti.
For the next stage, it's over to Stefano, who first chops garlic for the scallop part of the recipe. Then some chilies. Parsley is added, Italian parsley, of course. All are chopped together and then transferred to a bowl. Oil is added, good olive oil, of course, a little salt and pepper, and this is all stirred up. Now fresh scallops are taken from their shells and tidied up, leaving on the tasty roe. Stefano is insistent that only the freshest Australian scallops will do. And now to the cooking. A little olive oil in a pan. The scallops are added, cooked just for a few seconds, then turned once only to have a few further seconds on the other side. Then the heat's turned down and the herb sauce added to warm through. Some of Franca's wonderful pasta is plunged into boiling water for a few seconds. Unlike dried pasta, that's all it needs. Then it's drained and added to the scallop mixture. A little more sauce, and that's it. Simply and quickly done, and it's time to serve. Pasta with scallops from the kitchen of the mother and son team, Franca and Stefano Manfredi. One of the world's classics gets the consuming passions touch today. It's lasagna, the great Italian baked pasta dish with its two sauces, meat and bechamel. Now, I've had lasagnas that have been sloppy enough to qualify as soups. I've had other lasagnas that have been tough and leathery, like an old boot. No danger of that today with the consuming passions lighter lasagna, made in 3 easy steps. Step 1, the meat sauce. Step 2, the bechamel. And step 3, the assembly. First, to the meat sauce. A couple of tablespoons of good extra virgin olive oil go into a pan, and I lightly saute a tablespoon of onion. Mustn't overdo the onion in the lighter lasagna. While it's softening for a minute or two, I grate some carrot as finely as possible. This will provide a gentle sweetness to the sauce and help with the texture. Into the pan it goes, along with a little celery. Enough to contribute to the overall flavour, but without screaming out, "Hey, it's celery in here." Now I cook this up for a few minutes and add a little chopped fresh thyme, or you could use a little dried thyme, and meat. I'm using lean minced beef, and it just has to undergo a colour change before I add my moisturisers, so to speak. Tomato pulp, or chopped tomatoes, about 500 grams. 250 mils of a light stock chicken or veal. And wine, I prefer to use a white wine. You could use red, a dry white wine. It's really optional, but if you're going to leave it out, just add a little more stock. A seasoning of pepper, and I like to use white pepper here. This is all stirred up well and allowed to bubble away contentedly, to boil off the alcohol and to reduce the mixture to a good thick sauce. Now to step 2, sauce 2, the bechamel. This starts with a little butter, just 40 grams or so, or if you're keeping an eye on your intake of saturated fats, you could replace this with margarine, as recommended by the Heart Foundation. Once melted, I add a heaped tablespoon of corn flour, or cornstarch if you're American. And this cooks gently for a couple of minutes, but it mustn't go brown. Then in goes milk, a little at a time. I'm using a reduced fat milk, stirring constantly until a smooth paste is achieved, as it is here. Now, it's here that many lasagnas go wrong, because what should be a delicately flavoured bechamel becomes a very strongly flavoured cheese sauce. Incidentally, bechamel, which takes its name from one of Louis XIV's courtiers, is actually a white sauce. The only flavourings I use are a little low-fat mozzarella, a little Parmesan cheese, a little black pepper, and a grating of nutmeg. Lighter flavour, much better. Once I'm satisfied with the consistency, and I am here, I remove from the heat, add an egg yolk, reserving the white for the next step, which is the last stage. Now, you can call me Mr. Old-Fashioned, but I like to use traditional pasta, which I boil up, then plunge into cold water and dry on a tea towel. If you choose to use instant pasta, you won't need to do all this, but you will need to make sure that your sauces are a little runnier. Now to the assembly. Into an oven-friendly dish goes a little of the thickened meat sauce. Fabulous. Then some pasta. And here you see that if you use the traditional method, you can actually cut the shapes to fit if necessary. On goes some more meat sauce, a little of the bechamel, lightly flavoured with cheese, some more lasagna, pasta, and the process is repeated until you get to the top. After the final layer of meat sauce, I whisk up the egg white until soft peaks form, and then fold it into the last of the bechamel sauce. And that's poured across the top. Pat it down neatly, and it's ready for the oven. About 190 degrees C for 3/4 of an hour, or until the top is a beautiful golden brown. And there it is, the Consuming Passions lighter lasagna, served with a sprinkling of Parmesan cheese and a garnish of thyme. I like to have my lighter lasagna with a big green salad, some crusty bread to mop up the juices, and a light red wine, a claret style, Australian of course. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Bliss. Two of my favourite times of year are spring and summer, and that's when these are in season. Beans in pods, members of the legume family. They're a great food. They're high in fibre, high in carbohydrate, easy to cook, and great to serve, especially with one of my other favourite carbohydrates, pasta. I'm going to make a bean feast, and for this I need about a cupful of beans taken from the pod. These are, of course, broad beans, otherwise known as fava beans. Usually we eat just the bean and discard the pods, but if they're just youngsters, the pods can be eaten too. Once ready, the beans are simply cooked in water for around 45 minutes. No added salt. Apart from anything else, it does toughen the skins. Now, beans have had something of a mixed reception through history. For the Greeks, they were a definite no-no. They were thought to contain the souls of the dead. The Romans loved them and served them up as a feast to mark the end of funerals, probably the first bean feast. For my bean feast, I like to make my own pasta, which is very simple to do. Flour and water is all that's needed to make a basic pasta. I make a well in the flour, add water, and slowly incorporate the flour from around the edge. By the way, if you're making egg pasta, the only real difference is that instead of using water, you use eggs, and the ratio is about 1 egg to 100 grams of flour. Once I've got a good dough-like mixture, I flour a work surface, tip out the dough, and start kneading, my favourite part. It needs to be well kneaded, and just add flour if it starts to stick to your hands. At least 5 minutes, but it's great exercise. Once kneaded, and it should be good and firm, I roll it out, keeping it well floured. I like to use my #1 wood for this job. I find a thinner rolling pin works best for this job, but you could use a piece of dowel or even a broomstick. The only thing that can really go wrong is if the dough is too sticky. If you keep adding flour, nothing can go wrong. Once it's about the size of a small playing field, a final flouring, and I roll it up on the rolling pin. Then it's put onto a board, the rolling pin comes out, and I cut my noodle strips. Pulling them open as soon as I can. Once they're all cut, the strips can be left to dry, and I can get on to the next stage of the bean feast. Into a pan goes a little fruity olive oil and lots of garlic, and that's cooked up gently over a low heat. After a couple of minutes, I deglaze the pan with some low salt stock. This is a veal stock I've made myself. Oh, and it's bliss. When this has reduced a little, I add chili, optional, but I love it. Chili sauce, sweet chili sauce you could use. I stir in the drained broad beans, add some ground black pepper, and it's time to cook the pasta. Into lots of boiling water, to which a little salt is added, I put my noodle strips, pasta strips, and they'll only need a few seconds of cooking before they're drained and tossed in with the beans, the chilli, the olive oil. Oh. A final sprinkling, a generous one, of parsley, and it's ready to serve. And whether you make your own pasta or use somebody else's, the dish is still bound to be a true bean feast. Best enjoyed with some crusty bread and possibly a light red wine. An Australian Pinot Noir would be absolutely perfect. From Consuming Passions, till next time, bon appetit. Summer is the time of year when it's great to eat seafood, when lobsters are in season and salads are the go. Make the most of Australian fish and seafood in these tasty stunners. From modest beginnings at the end of last century, the West Australian rock lobster industry has become a huge multi-million-dollar concern, with catches of around 10 million kilos each year. The rock lobster, or crayfish as it's known as locally, is still caught using traditional methods, with pots. The efficiency of operation has certainly increased with modern high-powered boats, and they operate in waters up to 40 kilometres from the WA coast, from Cape Lewin in the south to Shark Bay in the north, and around the Abrolhos Islands. Once out of the water, these tasty lobsters are rushed back to Fremantle, where their size and quality checked. They're weighed using an ingenious computer system designed here in Fremantle, and then either air freighted live overseas, principally to Japan, or they're processed for sale both overseas and around Australia. And small wonder the West Australian rock lobster is such a culinary hit, growing up as it does in some of the world's cleanest waters, and tasting absolutely superb. Another reason for the lobster's popularity has to be because it's so easy to prepare. They're best bought live and then gently dispatched by leaving them in fresh water for about half an hour. When it comes to cooking them, I like to boil them for about 10 to 12 minutes in lots of water, along with some pieces of lemon. It's important they don't overcook. While they are cooking, I'm going to prepare a simple salad with Thai influences. To the dressing first. Into a bowl I put a couple of tablespoons of lime juice. If I can't get hold of lime juice, I use lemon juice, some chopped basil, or you could use mint, a couple of tablespoons, and chopped coriander. Now there really is no substitute for coriander, but Vietnamese mint comes close. A little minced or finely chopped ginger, and a little minced or finely chopped garlic. And some oil, a tablespoon of an oil that's low in saturated fat. Peanut oil or macadamia or canola oil. A little sugar, a teaspoon or so. And if you like chili, a little chili sauce. I find the commercially made sweet chili sauce is ideal in this dish. One last thing, if you can get it, some lemongrass. I like to use the tender white part, crushed like this, and then finely chopped. Once all together, they're shaken or stirred, and I can make the salad itself. I like to use soft leafed lettuces, some strips of sweet capsicum, a little cucumber, and I find Lebanese cucumbers ideal. And then once the lobsters are cooked, they're drained, and when cooled a little, so they're still just warm, I remove the shell and just rinse the tail. Then I cut into medallions, toss with that Thai-style dressing, and serve on the salad bed. What a combination. The flavours of Thailand bringing out the best in the Australian rock lobster. Bliss. From Consuming Passions, till next time, bon appetit. As pelicans are aware, Australia has some of the world's finest fish, much of which is sold to appreciative palates overseas. But unlike the pelican, many of us are only just learning to appreciate this tremendously nutritious resource. And there's still nervousness about how to cook fish to bring out the best in it. Today, a Consuming Passions recipe that is foolproof. Fish parcelled with ginger and lime and served with a stunning sauce. First, the fish. On this occasion, I'm using butterfish and tuna, though any sea fish will do. To make the parcels, I use non-stick baking paper and cut out a shape big enough for the fish and allowing room to wrap it. This I then brush with a little oil and the fish goes to one side. Now I finely slice some ginger, fresh ginger which has been peeled, to make thin julienne strips, and I sprinkle these onto the fish. I also grate over some lime peel. You could also use lemon if you can't get hold of limes. A few pieces of spring onion, or you could use shallots or other salad onion, and a little capsicum or sweet chilli. Now I squeeze on some lime juice or some lemon juice, a few drops of sesame oil, and a little soya sauce, reduced salt, of course. A little sprinkling of white pepper, and the parcel's ready for wrapping. I just fold over the vacant half of baking paper, roll up the edges to seal it, and each parcel can then be baked in the oven. (180°C) for around 8 minutes, depending on the thickness of the fish. You can also steam the parcels. Now while they're cooking, I make a simple but stunning sauce. Into a pan goes a tablespoon or so of lime juice or lemon juice, a couple of tablespoons of stock, chicken or fish stock, preferably low fat, low salt, and over medium heat I add some fortified wine. Now here you could use port or a muscat. This is a liqueur muscat. A couple of tablespoons. Bliss. I then add a little of the mixture I was using in the parcels, some ginger, some grated lime peel, and some spring onion. This is then reduced for 3 or 4 minutes. It allows the alcohol to boil off. And finally, I thicken the mixture a little with a teaspoon of corn flour mixed with a little water. Once that's all incorporated and smoothed out, it'll be ready to serve. I like to enjoy these parcels with a little pureed potato and pureed pumpkin, which I cunningly pipe onto the plate. You don't have to go to these extremes, of course. They could simply be spooned on, but this is much more fun. I then put a little sauce on the plate and unwrap the parcel. Put the fish on the sauce, a final sprinkling of coriander, and there it is, fish parcels, which I'd recommend serving with a green salad and possibly a glass of Australian Chardonnay. From Consuming Passions, till next time, bon appetit.
Sensational mark, McKenna. McKenna made about a kick.
If there's one thing top sports people usually share with those who love to cook, is that they love to eat. And they usually love to eat plenty. Well, they need to, because they need to build up their energy levels. A classic example of this is Eagles champion Guy McKenna, who combines a love of the sport with a passion for things gastronomic. Guy, you love your food, but even with you, there must be some rules and regulations, aren't there, to what you can and can't eat?
Yeah, a lot of carbohydrates, certainly from if we play on the weekend, Wednesday onwards, and not too many fats.
Well, I've devised a recipe just for you that's full on carbohydrate, therefore energy, lots of flavour, but I think we should do a bit more exercise first, don't you?
Yeah.
So, to the superbly simple recipe that's perfect for a high-flying eagle or indeed anyone who cares about good food. A mountain of potatoes slowly simmered, then mashed with a horseradish cream and other ingredients and served topped with fish. So there's some protein, lots of carbohydrate. Now, Guy's going to help me with the simple recipe. Off we go. First to the fish. I'm using farmed Tasmanian salmon, but any fine white fish would also do for this dish. I usually get my fishmonger to skin it and to remove the small bones, and I check that there are none remaining. Once I've checked that all the bones are removed, I cut the fish into fingers. Although the fish is naturally uneven in shape, being thick at one end and thin at the other, this technique allows for all servings to be the same size. Now take a couple of pieces, stand them on their side with the skin side touching, and they're overlapped and folded to make a neat parcel. Now I tie the parcel loosely with butcher's string, just one small knot, making sure the string is cotton and not plastic. There, that's my one. How about having a go yourself, Guy? That's it, on the side. Excellent. Now the reason I do this is because it now guarantees that all the pieces of fish will be the same thickness. They'll be seared on the outside, but the insides will be beautifully rare, almost uncooked. Now, if you can just tie a knot in that, it'll be perfect. The salmon can either be fried or you could barbecue it. Just brush it lightly in a little olive oil. This is in fact cooking in a little olive oil, which of course is low in saturated fat. Now, to deal with those potatoes. These have been peeled, cut, and then simmered very gently in lightly salted water. They're in fact the only vegetable I cook in salted water. Once that's happened, I drain them and then leave them on the heat for a few moments to let the excess water evaporate before I mash them. On this occasion, Guy, perhaps you wouldn't mind putting a bit of elbow grease into that.
Love to.
Now, while you're still doing that, I'll add a few more ingredients. First of all, a little butter.
Would that make it easier?
Yeah. And a little freshly ground black pepper, some grated nutmeg. This is the only exercise I'm going to get. A little horseradish makes a wonderful addition to this. Or you could use the Japanese wasabi, which is a lot hotter. You know wasabi?
Got no idea.
Delicious, but very, very potent. So, Guy, while you're mashing, I'll turn the fish over. It's had its 2 minutes. Now some olive oil, a little extra virgin olive oil, and a final addition of some chives. You could also use spring onions if you couldn't get chives. That's colour as well as flavour. And that looks fantastic. Back to the fish, which I remove and allow to sit or stand in a warm place. Then I deglaze the pan with a little vinegar. I'm using a balsamic vinegar. And I add a little mirin, which is like a sweet rice wine. This will cut the acidity of the vinegar and will make a delightful sauce. Now just stick your nose over there and smell that. Starting to come good. Yes. And it's time to plate up. And what a formidable effort. I think that's enough, thank you, Guy. If I could just hand pass you the spoon, you can serve yourself on that side. I'll serve myself on this side. Oh, potato. Make a little nest in there. I see Guy's still going with the potato. Well, that's fine, because what I'll do is I'll put my fish onto my little nest, and I'll take away the string. And I'm sure that Guy will be finished soon, and we can... Sure you got enough there, Guy? I would actually probably put on another one or two.
More?
Yeah, because you will be playing.
Growing lad,
And
yeah.
you are a growing lad. A little nest there for this eagle. Now you can put your fish on there, remove the string. That's it. Onto the potato it goes. Oh, yes. See? And the little pan juices can go on the top there. And I can pour on that superb liquid. The mixture of balsamic vinegar and the mirin, that rice, sweet rice wine. So to the fork test. A fork for you, fork for me. Let's get into it. How's it for you?
The potato's nice.
The fish? Fabulous.
Beautiful.
You know, once upon a time, chicken was something of a luxury food. These days, we can all afford to eat it. Try chicken in these tasty recipes, and you'll find that it is bliss. Garlic wimps everywhere take cover. This is not your edition of Consuming Passions. But for the rest of you, a big welcome for what promises to be a big treat. Chicken with 39 garlics. It's true, 39 cloves of garlic in the one delicious dish. Traditionally, this European recipe would have been made with wild game, boar or rabbit. But I find that chicken is absolutely perfect. I use chicken on the bone, which I skin or get the butcher to skin, taking off most of the fat. I leave in the bone. Next I make up a wonderful marinade, and this is where the chicken's going to get its rich, gamey flavour. The basis is half a litre of good red wine, Australian of course. And you all know if a wine's not worth drinking, then it's not worth cooking with. Add to that some herbs. You could use dried herbs, but I prefer using fresh ones. Rosemary and thyme, both hardy herbs that grow pretty much everywhere. A good sprig of each, and a few juniper berries crushed and dropped into the mixture. Incidentally, rosemary, thyme and juniper all grow wild in southern France, and their game dishes are renowned. Next, some Dijon-style mustard, such a useful condiment, and I use the granular mustard for this dish, and a couple of cloves. More if you like your dishes more clovey, or is that clovier? Pour the marinade over the chicken and cover. It then needs to be left at least 2 hours, or preferably overnight in the refrigerator. Now to the cooking. Into a heavy cooking pan, I put a little oil, of course one that's low in saturated fat, such as an olive oil, canola or peanut oil. And over a medium heat, nothing too frenetic, I cook a medium onion, finely chopped, just to soften, stirring often. Now, while that's cooking, I drain the chicken pieces, and you'll notice they're starting to look a little gamey already. A nice rustic tinge to them. I reserve the marinade and dry the chicken pieces briefly on kitchen paper, and then stir them into the onion and oil. At this stage, I'm just looking to brown them a little, not to cook them. Once done, in goes the marinade, and next, the garlic. Many European dishes call for 40 cloves of garlic, presumably because of some religious reason. Well, Consuming Passions is a secular show, and anyway, 40 garlics is a bit over the top, so I'm going to use just 39. They're just taken from the bulb and popped into the pot, skin and all. Now, because all garlic cloves are different sizes, you don't really have to count exactly 39. Once they're immersed, the dish is cooked slowly, either in the oven at about 150 degrees for an hour and a half, or on the stove for about an hour, very, very gently. Once the chicken is cooked, as it is here, it's removed to a serving plate and kept warm. The liquor is then strained into a saucepan and is boiled for several minutes to reduce to a thick sauce. Now to the garlic. Once it's cooled down enough for you to handle, you just squeeze the garlic pulp out of each clove, and if you taste it, you'll be amazed at how mild the flavour is. So mild. All the garlic cloves are put into the sauce, along with the onion that's been strained out. 1 or 2 quick stirs, and it's ready to serve. I like to serve my chicken and 39 garlics with some plain cooked noodles and a big green salad. And the perfect wine partner for this dish? Why not a Shiraz? Australian, of course. Till next time, from Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Oh, yes. Rice. one of the world's most important and most versatile of foods. And one of the great culinary marriages is that of rice and the chicken. It's a splendid combination of carbohydrate and protein, which can't help itself from tasting superb, as it does in the Consuming Passions recipe for chicken pilau. Let's start with the preparation for the rice. That consists of sautéing quite a large quantity of thin onion slices in a combination of oil and a tiny amount of butter, or you could substitute margarine. Once the onion has started to soften, I remove half of them. And into the pan I put a cup of rice. I'm using a long grain rice, one that was bought parboiled. It's excellent for this dish. I just have to lightly brown it with the onions. At the last minute, I add some finely chopped garlic. You could use minced garlic. And of course, garlic wimps may omit this stage. Now I pour in some chicken stock, just to cover, and then a little more. On goes the lid, down goes the heat, and it's just allowed to simmer at that wonderful bloop bloop rate that I like so much. Now to the chicken. I buy skinned boned thigh, and about 500 grams would be enough for 4 people in this pilau. I simply cut it into bite-sized pieces. Once cut, I get a very clean plastic bag and put in some spices. Coriander, a couple of teaspoons, and 5 spice. Shake it about, and then put in the chicken pieces. And shake them all about. 5 spice, of course, that fabulous combination of star anise, cinnamon, cloves, Szechuan pepper, and fennel. Once they're well coated, they're ready for cooking, and I just gently saute them in a little oil, some sesame oil and perhaps a peanut oil or an olive oil, one that's low in saturated fat. 3 or 4 minutes, and when they're cooked, I remove them and toast some nuts. Pecan nuts are fine, or of course we could use the macadamia nut, the Australian nut, or a combination of the two. But don't forget that nuts are high in fat, the good fats, but nevertheless high in fat. Once toasted, they're removed, and I add some corn kernels, stripping them from this cob. They just need a few seconds of sautéing in the pan. They have to get nice and brown. It's a technique used in a lot of Southwest American cooking. And really good corn doesn't need more than this. I also toss in a few currants and just let them warm through. By now the rice should be cooked. Let's check it. It is. It's now just a matter of combining all the ingredients, the rice with the chicken, the nuts, the currants, the corn, and it's almost ready to serve. One more thing, remember those reserved onions? Yes, they just have to be quickly browned, and I choose to do this in a non-stick pan, and then placed on the top. Sprinkling of coriander, optional, but I love it, and a little black pepper. And there it is, the Consuming Passions chicken pilau. I like to accompany the chicken pilau with a cucumber and tomato salad, and I think that a glass of an Australian Riesling would be absolutely perfect. From Consuming Passions, till next time, bon appetit. Fruit, whether it's fresh, canned or dried, comes into its own in summer. Try leaving room for a few of my fruity favourites. You will not be disappointed. Hello and Merry Christmas from Consuming Passions. Well, if it is or it isn't actually Christmas, it's always a good time to make Christmas puddings. You see, they keep so well. In fact, like many of us, they even improve with age. So it's a good idea to make them well in advance. Now, traditional Christmas puddings are often dark and heavy, and positively the last thing you'd need to conclude the Christmas feast. But not so the Consuming Passions Australian lighter Christmas pudding. Why Australian? Well, because the key ingredient is Australia's most popular nut, the macadamia. And we'll start the recipe with them. I use a couple of 100 grams of macadamia nuts, unsalted of course, and whacking them with a rolling pin. The macadamia is high in unsaturated fat, and that's the good fat we should be using to replace saturated fats in our diet. You'd find plenty of saturated fat in an old-fashioned Christmas plum pudding. It doesn't matter how roughly this is done, or if there are some big bits remaining. Now, the crushed nuts go into a large mixing bowl, the larger the better, to allow freedom of movement when it comes to stirring. And in go some other ingredients. 750 grams of mixed dried fruit with peel, the sort of mixture that's widely available in supermarkets. Some chopped dried apricot, and here I prefer to use the Australian grown apricot. 125 grams of breadcrumbs, preferably freshly made from day-old bread. I find it's more moist than commercially made breadcrumbs, which tend to be rather dry. 150 grams of self-raising flour, and the grated rind of a lemon. Now to spice. I use grated nutmeg, and you could add cinnamon and mixed spice. I tend to prefer using all three. I then stir this mixture thoroughly and set it aside. Now, in another bowl, I have 3 eggs, to which I add beer. A strongly flavoured traditional style of beer is best for this, an ale for a lighter pudding, or a stout for something a little darker. The mixture is thoroughly beaten. And don't forget that if a beer is not worth drinking, it's not worth cooking with. Once well beaten, it's into the dry ingredients, and the mixture is stirred well, preferably by everybody in the house, even if that means a TV crew. Thank you, that'll do. Traditionally, that's for good luck. And once the ritual's out of the way, it's time to load some pudding basins. I like to use china basins. These have been lightly oiled, and I put in the mixture, allowing room for expansion. They will grow when they're cooking. Now, the observant among you would have noticed I didn't add any sweetening. No sugar necessary. There's plenty of sweetness in the dried fruits. Now I cover the pudding mix with baking paper. I find the easiest way to do this is to fold a piece of square paper like this. I then find the centre of the pudding, hold the folded paper against it and snip. And when it's opened, it's the perfect size. I then just cover with a piece of clean cloth, tie a piece of string around tightly to hold the cloth in place. I find this easier to do when the cloth is damp. And I simply bring the cloth up and tie a couple of knots on the top. Once tied, it can be put in a cool, dry place for storage until Christmas Day. On that day, it goes into a large saucepan of water. The water should come up to about halfway up the basin. It's then steamed for about 5 hours until it's ready to serve. Now, an accompaniment. Now I find the perfect lighter partner for this pud is a yoghurt thickened with orange. A good cup of natural yoghurt is mixed with the grated rind of an orange and a couple of teaspoons of orange liqueur. It's then put into a clean cloth that's placed in a sieve, and this goes in the fridge for at least half a day or overnight. When it's time to serve the Australian lighter Christmas pudding, I simply pour over a little warmed brandy and set light to it and enjoy with some of that delightful orange-flavoured yoghurt. At any time of year, this pudding is absolutely perfect. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. Dame Nellie Melba, not just an extraordinary Australian soprano, she also provided the inspiration for one of the world's best-known ice cream dishes, Peach Melba, a recipe devised more than 100 years ago by the great chef Escoffier. A peach served with ice cream and raspberry sauce. Today, in the tradition of Escoffier, Consuming Passions honours another diva, Joan Carden, also a great soprano and star of the Australian opera. The sweetness of Ms. Carden's voice was my inspiration for a very important Australian dessert. And while it does use a little ice cream, there are no peaches, only pears, hence the dish's name, Pear Carden, not to be confused with Pierre Cardin. First, to the pears. Either good, ripe eating pears or cooking pears will be fine. I allow 1 per person and peel. I leave the stalks on, and once peeled, the pears are rubbed with lemon juice or orange juice to stop them oxidizing and going rusty. Now in a largish pan, I mix up a very special syrup. The juice of an orange or two, I need about 300 mils, a tablespoon or 2 of sugar, and these are boiled up until the sugar has melted. Now into the pan goes some wine. You could use red or white wine. The best wine for this is one of the sweeter varieties. Of course, they're mostly white. Late picked Semillon or Riesling, or even a spicy Gewürztraminer. I'm using a botrytis-affected Semillon, a wine which is an exceptional dessert drinking wine and possibly a little extravagant cooked into a dessert. But then this is a dish which is very important. A good glassful and some spices are added. A little cinnamon, just a piece of cinnamon stick, that'll be removed later, and a couple of cloves, which will also be removed later. In go the pears, and the lid goes on. The heat goes down, and they're allowed to simmer for anything between 10 minutes for an eating pear to 30 minutes for a cooking pear. And while they are cooking, it gives me a chance to make some praline. Almonds and sugar is all it takes. Into a pan is tossed a few almonds with the skin still on, and they're allowed to toast a little over medium heat. Then I add sugar, about the same weight as the almonds, and this is all cooked together until the mixture starts to brown and the almonds start a popping. Incidentally, you can make as much of this as you like. It keeps very well. Once the colour's right, as it is here, I pour it onto an oiled marble slab. And spread it out with a wooden spoon or spatula. You can also spread it onto an oiled baking tray. Once it's cooled and is nice and crisp, it'll break into small pieces. I then crush it in a mortar. Or you could wrap it in a clean cloth and give it a good bashing with a rolling pin. You could also do this in a food processor, but take care not to overdo it because the mixture will turn into a putty. Such good exercise, and it doesn't have to be perfect. A few lumps won't hurt at all. Once the pears are cooked, they're removed and drained and allowed to cool a little. And they smell delicious. Now I just have to take the spices out of the sauce, turn up the heat and allow it to reduce to about 1/3 of its volume. When it's time to serve, a little sauce, on goes the pear, a dollop of ice cream, reduced fat of course, a sprinkling of praline, and a little grating of orange rind. And there it is, Pear Carden, Consuming Passions tribute to the Australian Opera's Joan Carden, whom I toast with a little of the wine used in the sauce. From Consuming Passions, bon appetit. There's only one place in the world where I often start a meal with dessert. It's on Balmoral Beach in Sydney, where former photographic stylist and fashion editor Victoria Alexander has converted an old bathers pavilion into an eatery. Now, like many a passionate lover of good food and wine, Victoria never intended becoming a restaurateur. Rather, she sort of fell into it when the pavilion became available back in 1988. Since then, along with chef Genevieve Harris at the helm in the kitchen, Victoria has made a stylish impression on Sydney's food scene. And it's not just the food and wine that's important. Victoria believes the look of the place is a very important part of the dining experience.
Yes, it's really an extension very much of myself, of my home. We're all a family, it's built on teamwork, and I guess we like to come to work and have that environment. I play with it all the time, which is unusual for most restaurants.
And of course your chef is very much part of that team.
Genevieve Harris has been with us for 3 years now. Together we've really built the restaurant. We work well together. She likes her work to speak for her rather than to be up front, and I guess I do the up front, she does the behind very beautifully.
One of the things you make here, and something that I love in small quantities of course, is honeycomb. I didn't realise how simple it is to make. Let's have a look at how it's done. The first step is to put the sweeteners into a pan. Some caster sugar and either a mixture of honey and golden syrup or glucose, as is used here. You see, made honeycomb doesn't actually have to have honey in it. Next, water is added, about the same volume as the sweet things. This is then placed on the stove and over fairly vigorous heat. It's all boiled up. Once it starts bubbling, it's a good idea to brush the sides of the pan with a brush dipped in cold water. This stops the sugar crystallizing and possibly burning. Now what we're looking for is a golden colour, just like this. At which point there's some deft work as the pan is removed from the heat. Bicarbonate of soda is quickly added and stirred. Now this creates small bubbles in the mixture and it becomes foam-like. Once well mixed, the honeycomb solution is poured onto a work surface that's been covered with non-stick baking paper. Another sheet is placed on top, and using a tea towel or a piece of cloth, the mixture is smoothed to an even thickness, and near enough is good enough. Once cool, the top paper is removed. The honeycomb is turned over, and the other paper is removed, leaving the finished article ready to eat. Delicious and very simple to make. Now Victoria, tell us about the pièce de résistance we're going to see today.
Vanilla baked ricotta with peaches. It's lovely. Any time of the day. Good for breakfast, great for dessert. I think it's divine outside. I've cooked it at home outside for lunch.
Well, let's see Genevieve's hands creating this masterpiece.
That's all she'll let you see.
Caster sugar is put into a pan and water is added. This will go to make up a poaching syrup. Now fresh peaches are cut. Depending on the season, other fruits could be used, pears for example, and some of the fruit is then put in the syrup for a little poaching. Now to the baked ricotta. Step 1 is to cut a couple of vanilla pods. Cut them in half, then lengthways, and to scrape out the tiny seeds which provide the vanilla flavour. Vanilla essence is really no great substitute for the real thing in this dish. The seeds are then mixed into the ricotta, which of course is a good light, low-fat cheese. Now it's time to add the eggs, and then icing sugar, or confectioner's sugar as it's known in some parts of the world. Finally, the mixture is poured into loaf tins on tops of strips of baking paper. They're put in to help remove the ricotta when it's baked. This takes around 40 minutes. Meanwhile, some cut peaches are glazed by dipping in sugar and then browned either like this with a blowtorch or under the grill for 2 or 3 minutes. Once cooled, the baked ricotta is released from the pan and sliced before being served with the glazed peaches, some syrup from the poached peaches, and a piece of that divine honeycomb. And there it is, vanilla baked ricotta with glazed peaches and that freshly made honeycomb. The final taste test. And it is bliss. From Balmoral Beach in Sydney, bon appetit. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Now why should that be? Probably because the apple is high in vitamins and minerals, provides energy in the form of carbohydrate, and it's high in fibre, so it's a fabulous food. Today I'm going to use the apple cooked and raw in a fully comprehensive dessert that looks as good, as it tastes as good, as it does you good, as it is easy to make. It is apple fritters. The dish actually starts with rice. It's terrific if you've got some leftover plain boiled or steamed rice. I simmer a cup of cooked rice in a small quantity of reduced fat milk, just a few tablespoons. I'm using an Australian medium grain rice for this. And once the milk's been absorbed after 5 or so minutes, I remove from the heat and add a couple of egg yolks and just a little more of that reduced fat milk. Now, while the rice mixture is resting quietly, I make up another mixture using fabulous Australian honey. A tablespoon or so, and a tablespoon of butter, or you could use margarine, such as canola-based margarine, remembering that that would be low in saturated fat and would qualify for the Heart Foundation's tick of approval. And 125 grams of self-raising flour. I beat this up well, and then add the grated rind of lemon and a couple of teaspoons of lemon juice. Some grated apple, and here I'm using a couple of medium-sized apples which have been washed and dried and grated with the skin still on. And I grate in half a teaspoon of nutmeg. And once this is all mixed well in, I set aside. Now I take the 2 egg whites that went with the egg yolks and I whisk them with a little bit of cream of tartar. It helps the stiffening process. I'm looking for quite stiff peaks, just like this. Once done, I can put all the components together. The rice mixture is added to the apple with the flour, stirred up briefly, and then I fold in the egg whites. I make sure I fold rather than mix so that I can keep my fritters light and aerated. And that's the mixture ready for cooking. But before I do the fritters, I'm just going to make some caramelized apple to go with them. Very simple process. Into a pan goes a little butter, tiny amount, or margarine, some sugar. Just melt that down a little over a medium heat, and then toss in apple slices. And once they start to turn brown, I apply a little liqueur. It could be a port or muscat, or it could be something stronger, and I flame the mixture. I love this bit. Oh yes! A final sprinkling of sultanas or raisins, and the caramelized apples are quite ready. Time to cook the fritters. Into a lightly oiled or non-stick pan, I put a few dollops of the mixture. Allow them to cook for a couple of minutes on one side, and then swiftly turn them over, and the same on the other side. When it's time to serve, I lay down a bed of very finely sliced raw apple that's been rubbed in lemon juice to stop it going rusty. A generous helping of that caramelized apple, flamed caramelized apple. A selection of apple fritters, a sprinkling of lemon rind, and a drizzle of the honey I used in the cooking. And there it is, Australian apples in an all-Australian dessert. From Consuming Passions, till next time, bon appetit.